You're listening to Salt and Honey. I think this is what, episode 8?
We skipped one episode.
Oh, okay, so it's 7.
So, I mean, it's kind of mixed up now. I guess technically it's 8.
Let's just say this one will probably go up first because that one was so long.
Yeah.
I'm like dreading editing it, but yeah, I'm Sloane, and we're here with Leslie.
Hi.
And Iasmin.
Hello.
And Iasmin is our friend and buddy, so just full disclosure.
Hi.
Yeah, so far everyone's been our friend because
They're our fave.
Yeah, they're our favorites.
It's me, your buddy.
Yes, our good buddy. But Iasmin does games, comics, lots of illustration work, and can you hear my dogs barking?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's all good.
Hold on. They're barking at the leaves falling.
I'm like, oh my god. What's happening?
Like, what is this?
Yeah. It's like the tree's like blowing in the wind and they're just like horrified by it. I guess I
Sloan,
get that.
do something.
Oh my gosh. Iasmin, your book just came out, Mishatra. Did that come out like the end of September?
It actually comes out tomorrow.
Oh,
Yes.
It comes out tomorrow?
Yeah, it
Okay,
hasn't
cool.
come out yet.
So
But
October.
Oh my
3rd?
gosh.
October 3rd. Yeah, you guys got the advanced copies.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's so beautiful.
It's so nice.
Thank you.
It's
Like,
ridiculous.
when I got it, I was like, this is so big, like a textbook almost.
Well, thank you. I hope it's more interesting than a textbook.
Oh no, it's definitely more than a textbook. I was just for comparison's sake.
Oh, no, it's all good.
Yeah, it's like hard getting like the full like weight of like a webcomic. Like once it's in physical form, I was like, holy moly, like this is monstrous. Like it's so awesome.
Thank you.
It's really cool to see.
Thanks so much.
Should we talk about Mishatra
Sure.
briefly, and then we can also talk about your games, and because you also had a couple different games come out recently as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, why don't you give us the lowdown on the book that will be out tomorrow?
Okay, so Mishatra is a story that's based on my experiences living with epilepsy. It started as a webcomic in November 2013, I want to say. So wow, it's been almost exactly 4 years since I posted the first chapter. I was having a lot of problems with epilepsy at the time, and I really just needed an outlet to get it out there with everybody. And so I just started drawing this comic sort of like as a catharsis in order to like get all that negative energy out and like process it. And I almost didn't post it. I was like really scared. I was like, no one's going to read this. But I did. I posted it and I started doing more. So I serialized it myself, like basically doing one chapter a month. And it went on for about like 2 years and it wrapped up in 2015. And throughout all that time, I just kept putting like my experiences with epilepsy framed into this character named Isaac, who isn't me, but is pretty much me. And I had this character be my avatar as I navigated and explained my experiences living with epilepsy and everything that comes with it. So that's pretty much it. It's like, I think like 300 pages total or something like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's basically
massive. And it's,
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it's like really massive and like really in depth. Like you really get down to the marrow of like this experience, and it's a really good book.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very personal for me because I just put so much of myself into it that it's a little it's kind of funny to have all that stuff be out there and be like, oh, well, that's a lot of personal stuff. But at the same time, like when people come to me and are like, oh, I can relate to this a lot, like that is so worth it.
Mm-hmm. Even like the small hints of like Isaac's family life, like that's pretty powerful. Like we only briefly see a couple of conversations over the phone with like their dad and just all the different kind of like aspects of dealing with epilepsy and how people see you and how your family sees you and deals with you. Like, yeah,
I wanted to like show all the aspects of like life with epilepsy is not just having a seizure. There's a million other things that go into it, like depending on your triggers, like preventing a seizure or like what it means to have this condition and not have other people understand it, how it affects your social life, your family life, all that kind of stuff. Like it's an all-encompassing package. So not only did I want to get across like how frightening and like everything else that seizures can be, I also wanted to get across like how much it permeates your day-to-day life. So I included all those details too.
Mm-hmm.
I just I just like that it's so like experimental and fascinating in how you show like visually how a seizure to you would feel. Mm-hmm. And it's just like such an eye-opening and like beautiful book, and I really liked it.
Thank you. No, it's really nice to hear. Yeah, I
just doling out some praise.
Thank you. I know I'm like blushing and sweating, but you can't see that. I put a lot of work into the visuals for the book, just because I really wanted it to come across visually and not just have someone be like, I'm scared, I'm afraid, or like this is really difficult, because just saying that through words isn't as effective. So I just put a lot of work into sort of having the seizures seem like there's like a bunch of like weapons and daggers and knives around you, and a lot of bright, scary colors.
Yeah, we talked on a panel at SPX recently, so I won't make you go super into like your layout, like styles and paneling theory, but that's like a really special part of this book, as well as like the way you like compositionally handled drawing, how you experience seizures and stuff. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So like we did talk on this panel about how the page is like a being and like a solid, like comprehensive thing. And so it should all flow together. So we had like a nice conversation about that. And it's no different for this comic, because of how much I had to convey visually and how much I really wanted my audience to feel everything that was going. I had to think really deeply about layouts and how it would change during like the more tense moments right before or during a seizure versus the more laid back, low key moments. And kind of had to think outside the box as to how to portray the feeling of a seizure. And there are scenes where there are depictions of non-convulsive seizures where I like tilt the layout in order to show how disorienting it is. So I really had to think outside of the box with this comic, because there was just so much that I wanted to convey that was like non-literal information. So it was a challenge, but I think it came out like people could understand it.
Yeah, I love those panels that you tilted, and like you have Isaac kind of like stuck between this other, not world, but this separate experience. So he's got like one foot in the real world and one foot in this. I don't even know how to describe it. It's very hard, but it was like one of those comics things that was like very like satisfying to see, because it was like so like unique, and you're like, ooh, I like this. Like,
yeah. It seems like a very terrifying experience, of course, but it's also like visually it's very appealing to me. Like I love those pages and those sequences just because they feel so visceral. And I think that's why it's so like important to think about paneling in that way, because it's such a it's like a living thing in a lot of ways, because it's like the only way you can really show like time passing or like pacing, or you really have to like show the audience like something that you
definitely
that you want to convey.
I think that like drawing this comic really taught me that there are things that only comics can do that no other medium can do. And I think that what you're describing that you found pleasing about the comic is one of those things, like the way that the page can work cohesively and give sort of this idea of this space is something that is like specific and unique to comics. And that's like part of why I really like comics.
Yeah, I think the other thing that stood out to me as well was your choice of like color palette, and how that played through the book and through the scenes. And it kind of reminded me of what's their name? It's like a mangaka. They do Bambi and Her Pink Gun. Do you remember who that is, Leslie?
Who?
They do that. Hold on, let me grab it. I have it. It's Bambi and Her Pink Gun. It's by Atsushi Kaneko.
I don't know who that is.
Does anyone know them? Okay. Well, okay. So their comic is like also kind of flooded in color, like the background, and then they have their inks as like another solid color. And
it's
then
like
they add like gradients.
Comic.
But
cool.
They're like the only people that kind of have this like really interesting, like not flat, but like a really specific graphic sensibility. And yours is the only other comic that kind of does that.
Thank you.
So I thought that was pretty cool.
I'll have to check that out once
special.
We're done here.
Yeah.
This is really cool looking. Yeah, I can kind of see it. It's like it's like very kind of like neon.
Yeah, I'm like by the description, it seems very us, like all three of us core.
Yeah.
We're like, I'm gonna read this after we finish recording.
Yeah, it's really cool. Let's see, what else? Okay, so I wanted to also talk about your games.
Oh yay, okay.
So when did Being come out? Like
it came out this spring.
Okay, cool.
Because I had like I helped organize this show for Palestinian Solidarity at a gallery here in New York. And it opened on April 1st, which is the beginning of Arab American Heritage Month. So Being was my artistic contribution to the show, and I made like a very short, probably about like half an hour, like RPG Maker game. It's like sort of like abstract adventure, sort of like survival horror game about like Palestinian lived experience, and it's from the lens of the future. So you play as like a future Palestinian, supposedly coming from space, from some space colony, coming back to the land of Palestine on Earth, and you are supposed to like gather artifacts and information from the past. And so I insert like my personal experience as being Palestinian and like others into this game for like players to play through. And it's like designed so it's very simple, and you don't have to ever have played games in order to go through it, because I wanted as many people as possible to experience it.
Did you get to play this game, Leslie?
I didn't get to play this.
It's really cool. It's like, well, Iasmin already explained it, but it's very accessible, especially like I don't play too many games. So I just really liked how easily this was to like kind of flow from like room to room and like space to space. And also there's this one part where you kind of have to like walk a very long distance, and it kind of forces you to like take the time to do that. Like you can't like speed up the character or anything. And I kind of liked how like meditative that was as you're kind of like discovering these artifacts. And it was really cool.
That's cool. I definitely have to check that one out.
Yeah.
I can send you like a link or something, or the file. But yeah, it's pretty, I'm glad that you say that, Sloan, because like, yeah, it's one of those things where like it's a subject matter that like a lot of people aren't familiar with outside of the politics. Everyone always wants to frame it around like the politics and the borders and what's happening today and what happened, yesterday and what was signed, et cetera, et cetera. And like, there's so much more to it besides that. There's so much underneath the surface. There's so much feeling and so many emotions and so many like aggressions you have to pull through. And I wanted to convey that and be like, obviously the politics is a very important slice of it, but like, let's talk about the things that people don't really get into.
Yeah. Like the human aspect, not just like that bureaucratic.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what do like games do for you that comics can't, and like vice versa?
It's funny because like I'm not very good at like programming. I feel like I don't have that kind of brain necessarily, but like something about making games to me is very cathartic, because there's something so complete about making a game, and especially like doing it on your own or like collaborating with a small like amount of people. There's just something very complete about having it done. And like people, we all collaborate with comics and stuff like that, but there's something about games that kind of lends it to be a bit more like open and a bit more social, or it can be as solitary as you want it to be. So it's like a different way of creating art that kind of makes you kind of step out of your box and think differently if you're coming at it from like a non-game design background. Like I didn't go to game or it's like school for games. I've never done anything formal with games. I just picked up like software that's like easy to use and free or generally cheap, and just kind of went at it with any ideas I had. And while comics has its own unique things that it can do, there are things that only games can do. And I enjoy those things, like putting you in control, like regulating how much control you do and don't have, like mechanics and things like that are all tools that you can use in your narrative experience. And I really love stuff like that. And I like sort of playing with those things, and not just because I'm not very good at programming, but also because, it's fun to kind of see how you can make something so different between mediums.
Yeah, we were talking to Meredith in our last episode, and she's making a game right now as well. And how is like your comics creative mindset different from like your game mindset?
It's because with comics, well, first of all, I'm really excited for Meredith's game. It's going to be so good. I can't wait.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I'm like hype when comics people do games too, because it's just, again, like it's just a different way of thinking. But with my process with games, it's a little overwhelming sometimes because there's just so much that needs to be done. Whereas like with comics, like I've done so much and I've like thrown so much of myself into it that comics feels like much more natural to me. So games is really kind of taking me out of my element sometimes. But my process with it is a bit more like, in the way that we talk about comics pages being like a full thing and like being like a being and like having to be cohesive, and how the layout is not just to exist, but it's supposed to be a part of it. That's kind of how I approach games, where there's the narrative and there's the visuals, but the mechanics are also like really important as well. And how you frame those things together is kind of like your page layout to me. So I try to approach it that way, and then like I can start to break down tasks and things like that. So I'm like really into software that is like, you know, like I said, like accessible, easy to use, user friendly, not really paywalled that badly. So that's why like I make stuff more with like RPG Maker and Twine. And I really like those programs because there's like such a level of accessibility, and like there's so much gatekeeping in games that when you have software like that that's accessible to everybody, that gatekeeping just, it pretty much goes away, and like people can make their stories without having to be restricted that way.
That's cool.
How was it working on Four Horsemen, which was like a longer form visual novel, and like you had a whole team working with you on that?
I worked pretty closely with the writer Kevin for the development cycle. I was just doing character designs on that one. And it was pretty cool. Again, like pretty outside my element, because I'm just making assets now instead of making a whole page or like a whole cohesive thing. But it was a really good experience to work with a writer like very closely about these characters. And we kind of got into a situation that I really like, which Kevin kept saying is like the chicken and the egg, which is basically we would just go back and forth about these characters, and like, I don't know, I draw something really stupid, like something really like stupid, like some character, like, I don't know, like quoting Drake lyrics or some bullshit like that, and I do it as a joke, but then Kevin will kind of pick up on it and make it like a part of the character's personality. And so we kind of go back and forth even with like the smallest details, and that kind of made the characters really form in a way that neither one of us could have done by ourselves. Yeah, so I like energy like that.
Yeah, I feel like when you're working with another person, for me it feels the best when there's like that back and forth, there's like a rapport going on. Otherwise, like, I know a lot of people work without having that, but I do think it's more difficult. Maybe not as fulfilling.
I definitely agree, because if you're just kind of both in your own world, like there's a time and place for everything, but that dynamic of kind of not working like with the back and forth it's just not as fun. And like I feel like the narrative kind of becomes like not as full and not as well-rounded, because it's like pretty obvious that both sides aren't really like connecting with each other in a way that makes it complete, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like with your own work, like Snot Girl is like very you and Brian like together, like it is like so like you guys and like it shows.
Yeah, I think it's like if no one, I think I've said this before, but if no one knew my personality, then they would be like, oh, it's all Brian. Or like if no one knew Brian's personality, they'd be like, oh, it's all me. So that's like kind of interesting, just because you kind of see what you know, I guess. But I do think that it's kind of been an interesting way to work, and it's definitely, I feel like it's definitely not something that everyone can do, just because you kind of have to like, it's kind of like you have to bare your soul in a way, but also it's not that big of a deal. I'm like, wait, it's not that serious. It's just like, it is very like, you do kind of have, I feel like you do kind of have to like be more open to it for sure, but it's also like a better way to work.
I think it's definitely healthier too, because like people do collaborate in comics, but I feel like it's so like normalized to be completely alone and like doing your own thing alone, which is totally fine. Everyone has their thing that they don't want anybody to touch. It totally is fine. But it's like also so healthy to work with somebody like that and go back and forth and engage, because otherwise you just get so wrapped up in your own thing, you know?
Yeah. And then there's certain points where you kind of can get scared of like doing certain things because you don't know what your collaborator will think. And then it kind of ends up like not being what either of you really wanted in a lot of ways.
Just do things with your friends.
I don't know. Yeah, that's like the easiest way.
Yeah. So Iasmin, you do a lot of Palestinian futurism, or what do you call it yourself? Like,
it's kind of complicated because the relationship between like Arab like history and culture in Islam is very complicated. But I alternate between Arab futurism, Palestinian futurism, and Islamic futurism. So I need to just figure out a better word for that, but it's like really complicated and like it's one of those things where like the politics of it and like all the implications of it aren't very like obvious to someone who doesn't have like knowledge of those things. So it's kind of hard to come up with a word for it. But yeah, I do all three of those things basically.
That's cool.
It was very cool.
With that in mind, what does like science fiction and your vision of the future for your like specific background and culture, and like basically how does science fiction and that kind of like intertwine for you in your work?
So like a lot of science fiction has to do with like a displaced people, you know, stuck in a spaceship looking for somewhere to call home. Like I love Keiko Takemiya, I love 2 Tera. And I was like, you know, why do I like stories like that? And then I was like, oh, like being Palestinian, like it makes total sense. Like you can relate really hard to this idea of this people like really just desperately searching for a home. And so much of sci-fi follows that narrative. And so it kind of hits me where it hurts. And that's part of why I love 2 Tera like a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way with that series in particular too, because like I also feel as if I'm from a displaced people, but in a kind of like in a different way. Like I still have access to my homelands, but they're like basically been turned into some sort of like weird ethnic Disneyland.
Yeah.
So it's a totally different thing, but I feel that for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, like do you think that sci-fi is going to continue to be like a thing that you focus on? Like, is that kind of the direction that you want to go in?
Yes. Sci-fi is like something I want to keep going with because it's like a really interesting canvas to put like present issues on and sort of like displace it from like the things people are caught up in with like, you know, like the headlines and things like that and the photos that appear in the news. Like it kind of helps people sort of break out of their mental box with that kind of thing because people are usually so focused on the politics of everything. So when you kind of remove these issues from their exact place and time while keeping the context in mind and kind of put them in a sort of like a different box, you can start to get to the root of them and not just get so wrapped up in, you know, like numbers, figures, and all those things that you see, like in news and stuff like that. So I like to do that because a lot of my work comes from like my feelings about identity and like my experience. So I try to put those narratives in that place so we can look at them differently. So yeah, I do want to keep doing with that. Like I want to keep going in that direction. There's like other stuff I want to do too. But when I look at like, oh, what's my list of things I want to do in the next couple of years? Like it's all mostly sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's I want to go in that direction for sure, just because there's so much and like there's like so many like narratives that we can roll into that relate to so many different things, like how sci-fi is definitely like a ground for like marginalized people to like express like a lot of things, and like how there's so much like relation to like otherness in sci-fi that I think a lot of us can really dig into. Like there's just so much potential there, and I just want to keep going there.
That's cool. True. Sci-fi is like definitely there are like a lot of stories that abstract enough, but it's also like very human as well. So like you kind of have like a little bit of separation, so it's not so close to what you're talking about, but it still has to deal heavily with themes of like identity or like displacement and like loss and those sort of things, which are very relatable, but also kind of having that like relatability that everyone's kind of like into cool space stuff. Yeah, definitely. That's like totally what I'm trying to do, because like a lot of what I'm trying to convey is very like abstract information for a lot of people. Like what we're talking about with adra before, like not a lot of people don't know what it's like to have a seizure or like to even know somebody's epileptic. So part of my challenge is like, how can I convey that to people who don't really know what this is, which is a lot of people. And like in terms of sci-fi and like my work with identity, it's like, well, you know, not a lot of people know like this particular experience or like what it is to be Palestinian or what it's like to be like agender or non-binary. So like I try to implement all of those things in a way where like it's relatable, in a way where it's easier for people to learn and like understand from it and relate to it. So that's part of why like I love the sci-fi canvas. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's cool too because it's like even with like everything that sci-fi has done, if you were to take, you know, a cliche like plot device or storyline and just offer a new perspective, like your own personal perspective, that opens up a whole new door.
Yeah.
Which I think is really like exciting.
And there's so much that's like open to interpretation as well. Like it's pretty subjective and people read things in different ways. So I think that's also like an aspect of it that's like kind of very fresh, and it always can be fresh.
Like levels like the emotional playing ground in a way, if that kind of makes sense. Like there's so much like opportunity, and there's so much that you can like make more abstract, and so many ways that you can like construct the narrative in terms of sci-fi that like sort of allows everybody to be like putting out these stories that are like really accessible in a way.
Yeah, definitely.
What are some of your favorite like sci-fi like archetypes or like tropes that you like to work with?
I like to work with?
Yeah. Like we know you like going into space. Like space is like a big deal, and like discovery and like finding home like among the stars kind of.
I like that a lot, and I'm like, damn, I think we already answered that question. But like, there's also like the idea, which I haven't really explored as much, but like I know Sloane, like you and I are kind of prepping to adjust this at some point, which is like the idea of like spirituality in context of sci-fi, because like that's something that's like really important to me and important to you. We've had conversations about this, and it's like something that like isn't really either like a lot of Western sci-fi doesn't really bring it up, or if they do, it's kind of denigrated or like treated as like the villain in a lot of ways. There's always like, you know, the super smart scientific, you know, bullshit, like guys, usually men, who are the protagonists, and they're like, you know, looking down at like this like, you know, crazed cult or whatever, or like these beings who still think religion and spirituality are necessary. Oh, haha. You know, you've seen all of those movies and stuff like that. And like that kind of stuff is like deeply offensive to me, because I'm like, listen, like half of this science that like you guys are basing everything on, like it came out of Islam. So I'm like, I didn't like that. That bothers me so much. So like I like to play against that and kind of explore spirituality, and also explore like the idea of self, and also those two things together. So like, so I guess it's like, what's your favorite trope to work with? But also I'm like, that's kind of like, what's your favorite trope to invert, I guess? Totally. I like to work with that because it's just like, you know, a lot of like Western sci-fi doesn't really implement that. It's always treated as like secondary or as like villainous, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And like, I think for me, I really like the idea of like trying to come up with a version of utopia that's not like either like very cold and robotic and like ultra controlling, or like a dystopia that's like super violent, or like, I don't know. I would love to try and make a world that's like extremely complicated, but embraces like differences and conflict, and like earns resolutions through like immense hardship, and like having those hard kind of like conversations with each other, while still maintaining like each person's like unique form of like personhood. It's interesting to me, but it's like, it's a very big idea and kind of hard to like smush down into a story so far for me. But
no, it's like I'm really cool because like those two extremes, the utopia and the dystopia that you described, like they're so tired. Like they really are like, so, you know, you see them in everything, and like a different take on it, like you're saying, is so important and interesting.
Yeah, and like just like a world that favors like nature over like control and technology, or like at least has technology that's not in the service of like weird corrupt social systems, or like capitalist or like colonist structures. Like that's actually very hard to do, and like, but I'm excited to kind of see that kind of like burgeoning in like the sci-fi scene, as like more marginalized voices get involved. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel like what has always kind of rubbed me the wrong way about like a lot of Western sci-fi is that it's a lot of the time it's so streamlined that you don't really get to see like the human aspect of it, of like people living in like worlds that are not our own but parallel ours in a lot of ways. It's just not, they like don't build them up enough, and they don't make the characters enough of like us to be able to kind of be like a better allegory.
Yeah, it's so sterilized.
Type story. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just like, yeah, definitely. Like it's so like it's just like a very linear like type of narration, and it doesn't work for me all the time, and I always feel like it's a little bit one note, just because there's like not enough like of like an inner world for most of those characters, and like the worlds are just very like either deeply like corrupt and everything's really bad all the time, which is not reflective of our world now.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it's interesting to see people explore that more, and explore why maybe people would be living in like, I don't know, corrupt societies or something, just because that's just what they know and what they're used to.
Yeah.
Just like,
just
that's
like
real
focusing
life.
on like what typical sci-fi stuff does, which is like just some like new technology, or like, oh, robots are sentient now, or something like that. Like it's so basic, and it's also always like, and so we talked about this at SPX as well, like it's always like just like some guy with like a chiseled jaw like shooting down robots, and every time I just roll my eyes, I'm just like, not only are like robots and aliens and stuff like shorthand for what like what society considers undesirables, like on top of that, like it just there's nothing behind it. So that kind of thing really bugs me too. It's just so tired and boring.
Yeah, and it's like, if anything, it's just only one aspect of that world, and to have that be like the whole story it doesn't like do any of the characters or like any of the aspects of that story any justice.
Yeah, like not at all. And there's like so much that you can do. And I think that's part of why I really like Keiko Takamiya's work a lot, because in her sci-fi stories, she always goes into like feelings like so much. Like everything is so emotional, and like everything is so beautiful, and like characters' interpersonal relationships are really important, and like the technology is also really tied into emotion in a way that like a lot of like mainstream sci-fi doesn't do. Like everything is always so like wistful and like sad and beautiful in this like really complex way.
Do you ever struggle with like feelings of like, or struggle with your own personal like authenticity when you're writing these stories that are deeply entrenched in like your cultural background?
Authenticity as in
I don't know. It's kind of not like it's like you're like you have a right, quote unquote, to like write about it. But like, I guess for me personally, like it's hard to write from like a native standpoint, because I feel like I'm not like, I don't know. There's a lot of like blood quantum stuff going on when and like the background of my writing, and like it's like a struggle. I'm like, I don't know if I'm like good enough to be like writing from this cultural point of view, despite being part of it,
I totally get that. And like that, there's a lot of layers to being part of like the Palestinian diaspora, because a lot of people like consider you a certain way, and there's a lot of politics. Like I totally get what you're saying, and there's like so many factors that play into that. And like there are times where I'm like, like this can be really difficult. I'm talking about a lot of stuff at once. But the way that I kind of think about it is like I speak for myself and nobody else. If people like are like, hey, I am a similar identity as you, and I can relate to this, or I agree with you, or I disagree with you, I'm like, that's fine. I'm always open to like a healthy conversation, especially from people who like I have a similar background we share. I'm totally open to it as long as it's like respectful and like both parties are like talking in a respectful way. But I can't speak for anybody but like myself, and I try and just be like, these are my thoughts, this is my idea, these are my perceptions. But like other than that, all I can do is just really like put myself into my work. And like the question of authenticity can come up, especially with like the way that like identity politics play into comics and games right now. But ultimately, like I don't think you can disparage somebody for putting out their thoughts and feelings about their own identity out there. Yeah. Like, I guess like, it's an interesting question.
Yeah. It's something, it's just being like a second generation, like ethnicity, or like I was talking to an Anishinaabe artist who's from like the East Coast, and they were just talking about how like there's legal structures in place to keep Native people like primitive, like quote unquote, like technologically primitive. And I feel like that applies a lot to like Hawaiian people too. Like they only view you as native if you are only using certain tools. Like you can only hunt with certain hunting gear. Like you can't use certain traps. Like you have to keep it really basic and only hunt for like yourself or like your immediate family. And so it's kind of interesting. It's like this weird like imperialistic like stunting of like cultural growth. And if you like go beyond that, like for somehow there's like a weird cultural eye on you that, I don't know, it makes me feel like not like less of a native person or less of this.
No, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like a weird a weird thing that's very hard to describe, but yeah, I think you also have that describe that as well.
I think that that's like really important to bring up because like the question of authenticity always comes up every time there's some kind of issue or disagreement in our community. And ultimately, like people may disagree, but like in my opinion, whether you disagree or not, like you can't really tell someone what to do with their experience and with their culture and their identity. And there's plenty of like, you know, artists that I've seen who do art and who are Arab and they're Muslim and they have certain views on like where our culture is going, etc. And like, I don't agree. I don't like how you depicted this, but like, who am I to be like, you know, you're wrong. Like I can talk to them and we can have a discussion, but I don't think that anyone can really tell you who you are, and what you should be doing with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my opinion on it. And like, I'm glad you brought it up because like, it's so important to like kind of break down how you feel about that issue. But yeah, it's just like ultimately like you are who you are and what you're going to talk about. If it's coming straight from the heart and it's coming from like a place that's like true and real, like I don't think I can disparage somebody for that.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see. We talked a little bit about Towards Terra and like Keiko Takamiya. Do you have any other like big influential science fiction comics that have impacted your work?
The comics stuff, it's actually funny. The sci-fi comics are kind of small in number because it's like mostly Keiko Takamiya and like Tezuka's like sci-fi works. I really want to dig into more, but like a lot of that stuff has also been like very in the community that I've been seeing lately. Like that kind of thing is more what I've been reading as far as sci-fi goes. Like obviously, Sloane, I love your sci-fi work so much. I'm like, I don't know how much you want to talk about it, but I love your most recent sci-fi project a lot. And
thank you.
Like I really like our friend Chris does a comic called My Car is a Spaceship, My Spaceship's a Boy.
Yeah.
And I love that comic so much because like Chris's take on like this science fiction, like this future universe is like really good, really cute, like really very like her. And like just things like that. I really like Kevin Chapp's like newest book, like Fuchi Perf is also really interesting because it is kind of set in like a far-flung future, but is very human and very tied to like what we're going through now. So like there's like the big two mangaka that really influenced me, but like a lot of stuff that's going on now currently in our community is like really making me think about stuff as well. But it's one of the biggest influences for me is actually like literary. I'm a huge fan of like Arthur C. Clarke's work. And we did talk about this a little bit like a while back, but Clarke's work really focuses on like very heavy science because he was incredibly smart, but also very humanistic. So like his book, The City and the Stars, focuses on like cultural differences between humans on Earth in a far-flung future, but like without being really annoying about it. Like, just like in a very like natural way. And it also addresses like queerness in a very subtle way. And also more prominently, The Fountains of Paradise, which he wrote while he was living in Sri Lanka, also goes way more into the idea of queerness in the future, in particular pansexuality and also polyamory. So I really like his take on this stuff because it's like more of a literary take, but it's also exploring so many things that I'm really interested in.
That's cool. Yeah, those are really good books.
Yeah, how about...
Leslie, do you have any faves?
Yeah, I was going to say, how about you guys?
I read AA like last week.
Oh my god, so
nice.
good.
I'd love to hug you. It was so good. I love that one. It's really... I like... It explores like a lot of the themes that she usually explores, like kind of like replacing people and like and like sexuality and gender identity stuff, which I think is really interesting. And she's kind of like, she obviously approaches it from a more like emotional human point of view.
Yeah.
And I also like Battle Angel.
Oh yeah, Battle Angel. Have you read any of Battle Angel yet?
A very long time ago. But I want to read it again.
Yeah, I feel like that one, I feel like it's just so, it's like so heartbreaking in a way that's almost like hard to explain, because it like builds up over like what feels like years and years in the comic.
Yeah.
And she just goes through so many different kinds of like transformations and like iterations, and her identity changes along with like her environment, but she's always kind of like the same person as well. So it's just, I don't know, it's like such a, like when you kind of reach the emotional climax of that comic, it's just like so devastating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, the biggest thing for me that stood out was like her struggle with what constituted her identity. Was it like her body? Yeah. Was that who she was? No. Was it her memories? No. You know, yeah. And it was just like her passion for fighting, like, to a certain degree it was, but then eventually that kind of also fell out from under her.
Yeah, exactly.
And just like, I was like really moved by that as like a teen, especially like a pubescent teen. I was like, oh god, this is me. I'm Alita.
I know. I can't wait for it to get re-released.
Oh my gosh, me neither.
I've been really wanting the original comic like really badly, and it's just been out of print for so long. And like every like anime nerd in the 90s had the like first volume illustration as their like desktop.
I know. Yeah, actually, that's what I was thinking about that recently, because I heard it was going to get re-released, so it was on my mind.
Who's re-releasing? Is it Kodansha? Or is it?
I don't know. Is it the same people that did Blame? That did those like remastered Blame? Oh, Blame is a good one too, actually. Oh yeah, it is Kodansha.
Yeah. Okay.
That's pretty cool. So. Yeah, like the idea of like self and like that being deconstructed is always like a very interesting time.
Yeah, especially when it's kind of like boiled down to like humanity and kind of like what constitutes being alive, or like what constitutes like your consciousness, and like what part of that is real and what isn't.
Yeah. I forget like if either of you have played any like Shin Megami Tensei games. I'm not sure.
I only just played Persona 5.
I like Persona 5 a lot, but like the Shin Megami Tensei like mainline series is like, that's like that deep nerd stuff.
I always wanted to play it, but it's just like there's no PS4 port yet. So.
But I mean, there's stuff for like 3DS and stuff too. But like a lot of stuff that like Shin Megami Tensei goes through is like transcending the self and kind of like breaking down like what drives yourself and like what they call like reason you have to like go on or to exist, and like what that means, and like these like demons or whatever you can summon, like how do they play into yourself, and how do you treat them, like how does that play into who you are, and that kind of thing. And in some of the more recent games, there's like the idea of like anthropocentrism. And like the idea of like maybe it's a mistake for narratives and life to be so hyper focused on humans, which I thought was really interesting, because like that doesn't really get brought up in a lot of ways. So
yeah, that is an interesting topic.
Like anthropocentrism, like being like, wow, like it's kind of selfish for humans to be doing all the shit that they do. Like maybe it's kind of a mistake for us to be so focused on them, and like humans think that they're the center of the universe when that's actually completely untrue.
Yeah.
That's like
that's cool. I'll have to watch a let's play or something.
Get ready, because those games are like 500 hours long.
Oh my god!
Yeah. It's like, I feel like they're very not enjoyable when you're not playing them.
Only if you're a freak like me.
You kind of have to be like playing it in order for it to be like to reach its maximum potential. I feel, just because watching someone else play like any type of Atlas game is just not fun.
Just get like a hypercut or supercut of like all the good stuff. Yeah, because like even Persona, which is like pretty like light, is like,
I would never watch someone play Persona. I would just be like, bye.
It's like 100 hours.
Yeah,
the only
crazy.
way I did it was like me and my roommate were like playing it together, like on the couch, like when we had free time. But like that's the only way I could watch somebody is like, here's like one of my best friends, we're just gonna sit down and drink some beer and like I'll watch you play this game. But like that's like about the only way I could watch someone else play that game. But
I'm on my second playthrough of that game actually.
You are?
Yeah.
How's it?
It's good. I skipped through everything that I already know.
They talk so much. They talk so much.
They talk a lot. They talk a lot.
They talk so much. I'm just like holding... wait, can you hold down the skip? I don't know. I'm just like mashing the skip button over and over again.
I think you can just like fast forward it. I don't think you have to hold it down or anything.
Oh, thank God. That's like, we're in the future. You can skip everything. Have you guys like tried to go back and play an old game where like you can't skip stuff and you're just like, oh my gosh. It's like torture.
And they talk so slow.
Yeah.
And it loads forever. But like Sloane, we were also talking about Blue Sub 6.
Blue
Submarine number 6.
Sorry, I like audibly gasped.
Yeah. Yeah, that one was like pretty formative for me too.
Yeah,
it was like
Adult Swim as like a preteen. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, we're all
it was like
babies.
Yeah,
it was like an OVA or something. Was it?
Was it?
It was like an OVA.
Yeah.
It was like 6 episodes, but it was like adapted from a.
It was like a manga, right?
Yeah,
I remember. I only saw it recently because Sloane, actually, you were at my house. You were staying with me, and we had like a movie night.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Seen it until
you made them watch it.
Yeah, I'm like, we're watching this right now.
I think Sloane, you showed me like a screen cap. You're like, look at that hot guy and look at all these cool fish people.
Oh yeah,
and I was like, all right, I'm into it. Let's make some popcorn.
Yeah, I was like the hot shark guy, but he has like a horrible voice.
Oh yeah, it was terrible.
Oh yeah,
we all cringe.
I think it was better, and like the sub was better, like. But the dub is like his voice sounds like so high pitched and weird and bad. Oh
yeah, but I think like the original manga is like quite old, and then like Range Murata did the OVA design, so they're pretty different.
Yeah,
it's cool.
Yeah, it is. It does look like super old.
The manga.
Yeah,
1967.
Yeah, it's like really old, and then like they like basically redesigned the whole thing.
They made it
like sexy.
Yeah, it is very horny. I also like in Blue Sub 6, like we have talked about kind of like, like the gruff man who's like the protagonist, and like how kind of tired that is. But what I do like about Blue Sub 6 is like I noticed that there's like, like that main like shark girl who like he kind of keeps interacting with. And like the trope of like the sci-fi or whatever adventure narrative would be like, they get together, and they just totally don't. And that I actually was like kind of hyped to see that. I was like, they didn't really get together. Okay, like that's cool, because usually that just happens. You basically just expect it at this point. Like any like narrative where there's like a guy main and like a girl supporting like some het shit, you're just like, okay, they have to get together. But like that's what you expect. But like when they don't do it, it's like, that's pretty cool actually.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny though? Because like we're like, I feel like people are just like waiting for stuff to happen. We're like, oh my God, it didn't happen. That's so good. That's even harder than if it did happen. Like way harder. Maybe that's just us.
No, I'm like, hell no.
Six came out now, and people were like, they didn't get together.
Yeah, it's like that actually makes it interesting if you aren't.
You're not allowed. You're not allowed to be together.
I think at the end, doesn't she like kind of go back with that horrible shark guy, and like he like watches like her go weird. There, and I'm like, that's really. That part's really sad.
Yeah.
And, like, abusive.
It's really weird and sad and messed up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's some, like, really crazy, like, fish anthro designs in there.
Yeah.
Like, there's, like, a manta ray lady, and she's, like, huge jaws.
It's kind of like a sort of like
a whale lady, too.
With, like, all of those, like, sci-fi designs and stuff. Like, making characters who, like, aren't so humanoid, and, like, if they are, like, it's a little bit different. Like, I'm into that.
Yeah. I like when people are like not afraid to make their characters like really ugly and like monstrous. I'm like, just like lean into it. Like yeah, I like the cute fish girl, but also like I love the giant whale lady with like who's just like monstrous, like bigger than the submarine. Like I'm like, yes.
Yeah, like don't
more please.
More please. More like this.
It's like it was like when I watched it when I was probably like a kid or a preteen, I guess. It was like my Toonami phase. But I was like, wow, this is so like some of these characters are so ugly and like so monstrous, but also like they're totally like coded, and like the way they act is supposed to be like kind of hot.
Yeah.
Like attractive, and I'm just like, what the hell? What is this? Like So weird.
Yeah, that's good. And Evangelion is like the one that like a lot of people point to, and like they're, you know, like say what you will, but like there always is like a lot of good stuff going on there. And like the whole like sense of self thing too is like really important and like very formative. Like, you know, if you saw Evangelion or whatever, like you are influenced by it.
Yeah, totally.
It's like, I feel like people get it so wrong because so many people watched it as like teens and you don't really know any better. But I watched it when I was like 23 and I was like super depressed and I was like, oh my god, this anime is just like about being depressed. And it's like, it was probably like one of the best, I feel like it's like kind of one of the best pieces of media that addresses like being a depressed person and also like think like, you know, the whole end of the world like environment is so kind of like second to these people are super sad that everyone's dead.
Yeah, it totally is. Like it's doing that thing where it's like framing this narrative in the future, but like it's just window dressing for like these actual issues. Yeah. And I feel like the idea like that should get explored more is like we talk about apocalypse and world ending a lot in sci-fi, but there's also like the idea of like apocalypse of the self. And I think that's like what Evangelion is a lot about. And so, yeah, like it was really comforting to watch this and be like, wow, this is depression. And like, so am I. So, like, yeah, it's good.
Yeah. And like end of Evangelion where they just go like off, like really off the rails. And it's just so good. And I feel like when people are like, I don't get the ending, I'm like, what do you mean?
Well, I guess we're just not depressed then.
Yeah, I was like, this is so clearly about one thing, and you couldn't even get that. But I'm like, oh, well, I'm just better at watching anime than you are, I guess.
Yeah, I think I read some interview, like there's like a really famous quote from Hideaki Anno, and he said like the widespread success of Evangelion is like really bad. He's like, this is really bad. It makes me really depressed. He's like, this show is entirely about my depression and like how fucked up like I had like a lot of years of my life and how sad I was. And so if it resonates with that many people, then like we have a problem.
Yeah, but I think for most people they're like, oh, like the girls are hot and they're riding robots or whatever. True. And I'm like, they're really bad at doing it. That's like the whole point. Is that like everyone's really bad and they're like sad and horny. That's it.
That's Evangelion, in case you haven't seen it. That's the pitch.
Yeah, it's like that's basically a spoiler. It's just like 40 episodes of people being really depressed
and horny. I like how you brought up Moto Hagio, because like her work is always so depression, but like in a really like sad and beautiful way where you're like, I'm very depressed, but like it's okay.
Yeah.
Like I think I read like a Iguana Girl, I think was one.
Oh my god, that one's so
depression. Yeah. And I was like, wow, I'm like really hyped to reading the story. It's so good, but I'm so depressed about it. But it's so good.
Yeah, it's like carrying like your parents' burdens and like their pain without knowing how to kind of like unpack it.
Yeah, and that like that's definitely an aspect of like what we've talked about too, like trying to like frame like these like cultural and like very like personal ideas with you in like these sci-fi narratives. So like it goes along with exactly what we were talking about too. Like that idea is like so depression, and so to see it like framed in a narrative like that, it can be like really satisfying, even if you're like, wow, I'm in pain the entire time I'm reading this.
Yeah, and I definitely think like the whole searching for identity is such a like it's kind of like something that a lot of people that, you know, who either have like immigrant parents or like have different backgrounds that are not necessarily like, they feel like untethered in a lot of ways. That's kind of what speaks to them and like it's kind of a struggle that a lot of people either face or they don't face. And it's so prevalent in like a lot of sci-fi, and I feel like to just be like, oh, I just like looking at spaceships and stuff is kind of like discounting how much you can do with it, like the genre.
Totally. Sometimes it feels like such a waste, and I think that's like when we're talking about those tropes and stuff, like it's kind of upsetting, like you said, when you see those streamlined narratives and they're just not going anywhere with it. It's like there's so much opportunity here, there's so much you could talk about, but all you want to do is like show this like super quote unquote hot guy with like a bunch of guns, like shooting a bunch of people. Like, that's it? Really? That's all you got?
Yeah.
Like, there's so much here, and like there's so much talk about like self and everything. Like, I think I saw what's that really famous one? I think it was Blade Runner. I think I saw Blade Runner very recently. I had never seen it before. I saw it within like the past year or so, and it was a really, really hard watch. Like, really difficult to watch, like, this guy, like, gunning down all these androids and stuff. Oh, yeah. It was, like, really difficult, because I was, like, again, like, these beings are, like, shorthand for, like, marginalized people, and, like, particularly, like, gay and trans people, like, are usually, like, that's how people write them in, and it's, like, to see that and, like, see, like, these beings that are essentially, like, shorthand for me, like, getting shot down and like treated that way, it was like really violent and like really disturbing for me in a way that like I think a lot of people would just shrug off. But like as an adult, like who like has like realized their identity and stuff, it was really painful. Like I almost couldn't watch it. You know, it was really sad.
The killings there especially are like depicted in like very sensually as well. So there's like this weird fetishy eye on these like robots as he's like shooting them. It's pretty uncomfortable to watch.
That's why I didn't like it. I was like, I'm sure that like people are gonna come at me sideways and be like, well, you just didn't get it. And I'm like, no, I got it and I didn't like it. I don't want it.
Like, I think I have like a complicated relationship with Blade Runner. I do, like, visually, I think it's like unparalleled. And there's like certain parts of it, like I really like the world building part of it, just because it felt kind of like this like live thing that I wanted to know more about. Like I want like 8 more hours of that. You know?
Totally. Like the shots of buildings and like, stuff. Like hell yeah, I'll watch it.
Like it's like super cool, and I like that part of it. I love like Sid Mead's paintings and stuff like that.
Yeah. I love the language that's like, I think it's like 4 or 5 different languages that they're speaking. In some parts, it's like a weird, like multicultural slang. I thought that was pretty cool.
Like I feel like that aspect of it, like kind of like making this, I guess like this like fictional culture, but it's also like very reflective of how culture evolves in a lot of ways, is probably like the strongest part of it. Yeah. And I think that's like, it's definitely, I feel like other than that, it's just not, it's kind of just like this, it almost to me feels like a relic, just something to be studied for like the technical aspects. More so than anything else.
That makes total sense. Yeah,
I think the world has more depth than the like story that it's like in service to. But it feels less. Have you read any of the Nikopol trilogy by Enki Bilal?
No, I don't think I have.
It's pretty interesting. It's like from the 80s. Like it's a heavy metal artist. He's like Yugoslavian, I think. And it's like 3 volumes, and it's pretty cool. It's about like, it's like a futuristic kind of like 2023 set Paris. And it's under like fascist rule. And it's like really weird. There's like, the main character is this astronaut who's like been frozen for 30 years and like finally like lands back on Earth after being like in orbit
I have seen his work before.
Yeah, it's super beautiful. It's like these hand painted like oil pastel drawings, and like they're like amazing. It's cool though, but it's like there's this like a really deeply complex like political and like cultural mix going on in the world. Like the world building is really excellent, and then there's also these like aliens that come in a spaceship that's a giant pyramid, and the aliens are just like all the Egyptian gods. And they just like they're just like immortal, and they're just like have been observing and playing a game of like weird like Egyptian space chess and like observing humans over the course of time. Anyway, so it's like them interacting with the astronaut and like kind of using him to kind of explore humanity. It's really cool.
Dope.
It's cool.
That sounds really good. Also, you say big pyramid, and I'm like, I'm there.
It's super cool looking. But it's a good book for sure.
If it's okay, awesome. I just thought of something while you were saying that you're mentioning like playing a game and like observing and things like that. And I hope it's okay if I kind of like derail onto like another thing that I did.
No, go ahead.
So me and my friend Vrenny Stolberger, we do a lot of cons together, and there was like, I think it was SPX like 2015 or something like that. We were like really tired. like post-con, like just ugh. And we were like sitting in our hotel room, like, and we're like, let's just play like some old games or whatever just to unwind. And we played this old Windows game called Sim Earth, which is like it's basically like The Sims or SimCity, but you build your own planet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and we were like really
cool.
fascinated by it because it was just like you were just sitting there building this planet and like watching things evolve and then like fail and then die out, and then like fish people will evolve and then they'll do really well and they'll make it to like the Stone Age and then they'll die out. Or you'll get like bug people or, you know, dinosaur people and they'll make it to like, you know, the atomic age, and then like nuclear war starts and then they all die. Like you watch like all of these cycles of lifetimes and the clock is ticking in like the corner, and like you have, I think, 10 billion years until your planet like disintegrates with a supernova or something like that. So yeah, you're just like sitting in like this like mess of menus, basically just watching all of these civilizations like grow up and die out, and like all the while knowing that you only have like X amount of years, and like that should be a ton of time. It should feel like forever, but like it just goes by so fast. And like we had so many feelings about it. We actually like made a comic about our playthrough, basically. I should have brought it up earlier. It's called Life Cannot Exist Here. Because that's like the message that pops up if you try to like place the beginning of a civilization onto like the wrong tile. I'm pretty sure it says like life can't exist here or something like that. And like to us that was just so profound because like you're watching, you're playing a game, like you're observing all of these creatures and just like watching. It's like very, very sad and bittersweet in a way, because like you feel like happy when they're doing well, but then like either they're gonna die, or they're gonna do like an exodus and go off the planet and leave it by itself. Like it's really kind of heartbreaking in a way. Yeah, I would recommend playing it. It's like for free. You can find it if you just search it, and like you can just play it and get sad.
I only remember playing like Sim Tower, which is like not nearly as like big
or deep.
Yeah, exactly. You like can build a pool.
That game reminds me, Yasmin, I just added like a link to a short story on like our shared doc.
Okay.
And it's called The Life Cycle of Software Objects. You should read it. It's a little bit long, but it's like kind of exactly what you just described. It's like this person making AI, but like letting them grow naturally through like basically like a human, how like children would learn, but that they eventually have to like kind of do the creators kind of have to like do unethical things to them because, or like they won't survive because they have to be ported into like a new program to survive.
Oh wow.
It's really sad and like really good, but yeah.
I definitely want to check that out because that's really cool. I think that like more narratives pop up like that because like as technology like advances in the real world, like we sort of have these opportunities to like, for lack of a better term, like play God and like observe and like create and watch things like in ways that we couldn't before. So I think like those feelings are starting to kind of manifest more like in more people's minds. And I think that's kind of like we were talking about games earlier and like what the appeal of making games is opposed to comics. Like there's something about building a game with like programming and like watching the world unfold. Like when you're testing it, like you're basically playing through your world and you're watching it happen and like you know what's going to happen, but like something unexpected could pop up and that's like a glitch and you have to correct it, and like all of these things, like you're essentially just creating like your own little universe. And like you basically do that in like any other medium, but there's something about like programming it with your own hands and like all of these like lines of logic and like putting it into this package that makes it seem like its own little world in a way. And yeah, it's like it's kind of bittersweet in that way too. And there was a game I played recently called Localhost. Sloane, I talked to you about this a little bit. Leslie, I don't know if you heard about it, but it's a Twine game and it was written by Sophia Park, and there's like a bunch of other people who are on it too. And it's like a Twine game about like you're like a human in like the last few days before the singularity, and you have to like clear all these old hard drives to like get ready to like store everybody's memories. But like there are old memories and old AI on these hard drives. You have to clear them out. And in order to clear them out, you have to boot them up, and like you end up talking to them. And there's a lot of questions of, like self and humanity and things like that, and like the ethics of like erasing somebody's memories. Like what does that mean? erasing somebody's like AI or whatever is that their existence, you know, and all the like really bittersweet things that play into that. It's really good and you should play it.
Sounds
It
cool.
looked really good from the graphics looked really sad, like when I opened the like main page for it. And it's like the little like dirtied up robot and he's like missing a whole bunch of limbs. I was like, oh, it's gonna be sad.
It's like sad and scary. Like there's just like something really scary about like having this robot, and like the core conceit of the gameplay is you keep removing the drives and putting them into the same robot. Like the robot is just the vessel for you to like talk to all of these different drives. And so watching different personalities and different memories go in and out of the same body like makes you think in a lot of ways, and like the way that the different drives like approach you with like their morality and how they feel about being erased and like how they beg for their life and things like that is really, it's really profound. I would definitely like sit down and like a lot of things that we've talked about, like get ready to be depressed, but in a way that will make you think a lot about these things.
That's super interesting. I gotta play that. Adding it to my unending list of games that I need to play.
Yeah, while you were talking about like Sim Earth, I started looking up like Black and White, that game.
Black and White?
Dude, it was like this game where I think you can play God, and then you can like, because I was like trying to think of like those like games where you basically are playing God, and then you can build civilizations. But if you look up like Black and White game, like you would just, I've never played this game, so I don't know anything, but there's like these crazy like animal people, and I'm just like, and they're huge.
I like how it's called in the Wikipedia, it's like it's a God video game, like that's how it's described.
And now I'm looking at it, I'm just like, man, I thought this looked so cool, like
wow.
Like when it came out, and I don't even know what I'm looking at anymore.
Wild.
I'm scared.
I mean, they're really buff, so
I don't like what I'm seeing.
Is that good?
It could be horny, is what you're saying.
I'm like, I need to look more into like the God video game genre.
Yeah. I'm scared because there's a second one that also comes up, like a sequel.
Yeah.
And it looks terrifying.
They should make like new ones so we can play them and not be scared. Or be even more scared.
There's like a glowing giant cow in one of the screen caps I'm looking at, and he's like kicking.
Is this macro
like little medieval people? It looks like, or like little. Wow.
You're like, well, I guess we'll take a whack at it, and then
you're
make
like,
our black and white.
I'm sold now.
Yeah.
Yeah. What if you get like really, really into it? It's like bring back the black and white fandom.
Yeah, it's just us three. That's it.
Have you guys ever played a game called Galarians?
Oh wait, no, I haven't played it, but I really like the artist. What's his face? He did MPD Psycho. His name is where's his name? Showa Tajima. He did like some posters for Galarians, I think.
Is this like an Akira type thing?
You should
kind of.
Sort of. Yeah. Galarians is like this really busted game from 2000. I'm sure like the artist is really good, but the game itself is like incredibly busted. It's really hard to play, and it's like such a relic of like the year 2000 or like 1999 basically. It's like you're like this young kid who has like psychic powers, and like of course you're like wearing a choker and like are really emo, and like you have to like take drugs in order to like suppress them, and like there's all these adults trying to like suppress your psychic powers because like they're dangerous. And I'm pretty sure it was like almost entirely inspired by Scanners and like the head explosion scene in Scanners, because there's a lot of head exploding. Nice. Yeah, it's like if you take too much of this drug, like you'll die, but you should like take the amount to like kind of control your power without dying. And Rory Francis did like a really good short comic about this for Zeal, and about how like this future narrative of like being like this like sad, scared, like gay teen, and like with like all these psychic powers and like all these adults trying to like control your power in like this sci-fi setting, and like you're basically just being told to like beat up other like young, confused, sad, like gay kids, and like not really knowing why. It's like the way that like Rory frames like the feelings around it is like really cool, because it really like digs into the idea of like self and like confusion in this like sci-fi narrative. You should definitely check out this short comic. I think it's called Apolinar.
Yeah, I think I remember reading it. We'll definitely link it. It's good.
It's really good, but Valerian's itself is not so good. So I'm kind of sorry for recommending it, but the comic is really good. It's just one of those things.
I feel like
a lot of
those, just like a lot of those games, like early, kind of like PlayStation games, the early ones are just like, a lot of them are very hard to play just because they're like, the ideas are bigger than what they can do, like technically. So a lot gets lost in translation, I feel. They keep refreshing.
I don't know.
Yeah,
it's like, I don't know. When I go to record, it just refreshes the page. I think that's what's happening. Usually it doesn't do that though, so.
Okay, well.
We're all here.
Okay, we're all here. Okay.
I was like, because Sloane, we did that Inkstuds one together, and like, remember the audio was like really fucked up for some reason?
Oh yeah,
and
it sounded like we were like in a crystal cavern.
Yeah, and I was like having flashbacks. I was like, oh god, please don't let that happen. And like, it did.
Crystal cavern.
It's okay, we're good.
Okay, good. Yeah, at least we have good recording and everything. What were we talking about?
We were talking about early 2000s games, and then
like all of that weird bullshit.
How scary and ugly and like evil they were.
Yeah, it's like they were like trying new things and they couldn't do it. But I think that's kind of like the appeal of it, is that they were like not really working, but you can kind of see like the intent was there, and now I feel like it's so safe. Like a lot of narratives are really boring to me.
Yeah, no, because they're trying so hard, and like you can tell, and like there's a lot of heart there, and like just the only failing was like the technology. But like at the time, it was so innovative. My partner is playing Chrono Cross, which I don't know if you guys know about, but like it's the sequel to Chrono Trigger, and a lot of people hated it, like really badly. And I can understand why, because like it's really hard to play, but like the concept behind Chrono Cross is like kind of a similar thing, like sci-fi future fantasy. But the idea is that like at some point during the game, like you switch bodies with the villain. And so like at one point, like you become the villain, and it's yourself trapped in the villain, but like your friends all think it's the villain. And like there's this question of like self and like what makes you you. And like another clutch of the story is like you being transported to another dimension where like you've actually died. And like, yeah, like you like supposedly died in an accident when you were a kid, but like yourself is visiting this dimension and seeing how like people around you process your death and how they act about it. And so like there's like this very like scary, sad, existential message at its core, but it's just built into this game. It's like impossible to play. It
sounds like really fun, actually.
Yes.
But
it sounds fun, but like frustrating, just because, you know, we're talking about like how you can't skip stuff, or you can now. It's easier to skip stuff now, but those sorts of limitations are probably frustrating for like people that aren't willing to
it's
go through them, I guess.
It's definitely one of those things where like you kind of have to have like an endurance built up. Like I think that like now in like the trend of indie games, like there are a lot of games where like the gameplay isn't necessarily like the clutch, but like you have the ability to make like way more cohesive like stories and gameplay while like inserting these really important narratives. So like there's kind of like a similar spirit, I think, that we really like about that time period, but it's being brought to like everybody and not just like big name studios.
Yeah, I wish more games and like media in general would be comfortable taking weird risks like that with storytelling.
Yeah, it doesn't really happen anymore.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of like a lot of people's like ideas of storytelling is more cannibalistic in a lot of ways. Like you're seeing like the things that you like and the things that you're inspired by that you wanted to, you know, the reasons why you wanted to make anything in the first place, and then you're kind of taking that and being really literal with your inspiration.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like because like so much stuff is like tied to like aesthetic and like very like instant gratification, I think that's like a lot of the problem we have, like we're saying with sci-fi, like wow, it's so like one note and so boring and so linear, and like everything is really just focused on like how things look and like how they're cool and like etc. Like all of that depth is like gone, and I think that's like very much a product of the times as well.
Yeah, it's like, it's so important too. Like, you do have to think that what you're working on is cool a lot of the time, otherwise you won't be interested. But it's also like, that can't be the only thing. Like, it's not enough to sustain it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I want to see if you guys have read this. It's called Three Worlds Collide, and it's this weird, like, I think I posted it on Twitter one time. It's like this weird short story about like meta-ethics and like rationality.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
It's like a short story. It's called Three Worlds Collide. I can't remember if I shared that with either of you.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think
so. Sound familiar? Okay, you have to read it and you have to tell me what you think about it. It's pretty cool. It's sci-fi, but it's mostly trying to get across like what rationalism and like meta-ethics are. Mm-hmm. It's written by this dude who like is like at the forefront of like basically like online rationalism movement and like effective altruism. Mm-hmm. But I'll send it to you. But it's just about like these futuristic humans go into space and they meet another like culture of aliens that is based, their ethics are based on baby eating.
Oh, okay.
And the word for good for them means that one has eaten many babies. It's just really interesting. And then they meet a third alien culture called like the super happy people is like how they translate their name. And because the humans like experience more than one emotion of happiness, that they're like lesser than them. They're like, if you're not in a constant state of pleasure, then that's like not ethical for us to like let you.
That's so scary.
It's so funny.
It's really cool. So
that's
I'll tweet it.
I want to read that. And also, it's so scary,
fun.
Especially if you have depression. Like that's like scary.
Exactly. It's like, please don't tell me that. That's the only way to live.
Yeah. So, if you don't mind, Sloane, I actually don't really know much about rationalism and meta-ethics. Would you be down to like maybe like just give me like a short version of it if you can? Because I've seen it around and like I just don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain. I'm still like learning about it, but it's basically like a belief that everything has to be based on reason and knowledge rather than anything else, like emotion or spiritual belief. But it also takes into account that they can't discount spiritual belief because there's no like empirical evidence. So it's just like a very level-headed type of like scientific thinking. But they're just like it's just a really interesting movement. And there's like this weird rationalist subculture online that I've just been like following like this past year. They're like mostly based around this website called Less Wrong. And the main dude that's kind of spearheaded this group his name is Eliezer Yudkowsky. And he actually wrote a whole like retelling of the Harry Potter series as if Harry Potter was a rationalist.
Whoa.
It's really crazy, but it's also really good.
Is it good? Yeah. I kind of want to read it.
As someone who like didn't like, I read the first Harry Potter and then I didn't like it, but I read this entire thing and it's kind of insanely fun. And like, basically if Harry Potter was just like a scientific genius and how he would approach magic and like the ethics of like dealing with magic and how it affects people. I don't know. It's like really crazy.
Didn't Chris read that one too? Did you?
Yeah. I made Chris read it. She liked it.
I like, you guys can't see my face, but my eyes are like bugging out. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
You should listen to that one podcast that Sloane recommended. It's called Rationally Speaking, and they talk about a lot about different topics with like, different like people that study in certain fields or whatever. And yeah, I really like that one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's like really interesting to kind of see that perspective, and it's just very like, it's kind of like dry, but not in a bad way.
Yeah, and it's like hosted by this woman, and she's like super smart and like very assertive, and I like really appreciate just like listening to like a smart woman speak and like who's willing to question like the smart male guests on her show.
Yeah,
like I'm like
she does like pretty. She has like a lot of introspective moments as well, and like she just kind of like really like really level-headed, I guess.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like it's gonna kick my ass, and I'm gonna like it.
Yeah, it's like, really fun.
It's like really fun to listen to when you're working, I feel, just because it can kind of like, it serves as background noise, but also like there's a lot of times where I'm like, yeah, that's a good point.
So that's cool. I definitely want to dig into that.
Yeah, I'll tweet it at you.
Please, I'm like really interested because all this stuff sounds like the best parts of sci-fi for me. And like, I know we're talking not necessarily about sci-fi, but like they are kind of linked in the way where it's like, it's kind of like the best and like scariest parts of sci-fi for me. Like it kind of like, it's like that feeling where you're just like, oh, this is really scary on like a very like not even like emotional, like a very existential way. It's all like it pierces you in this strange way.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's definitely been like the main thing this last 2 years of like getting into like this scene and like reading like these rationalist fiction writers, and they just have like such a unique take on things. I'm like I felt like I was kind of finally like opening a new door to sci-fi.
That's really dope. Cool. Yeah, I know, Sloane, we've been talking about like kind of entering a conversation with like both spiritual and existential like horror in a way, like with our sci-fi stuff, and kind of like tying those things together. And like what it means to like be like just so like existentially like shook about like everything that you believe in, you know?
Yeah.
There's like a specific like fear, I think, that like in like questioning that sci-fi can really like have you do. There's a game called Soma, which is like a more mainstreamy kind of game, like not really done by a smaller studio, but it's like the same people who did Amnesia, if you're familiar. And it's basically just like a sci-fi exploration game. It's like very much about like body and like AI and like what it means. And basically like humanity tried to get off the earth and it didn't work. So you're kind of like exploring like the ruins of like their failed project to get off the planet. And there's just a lot of questions about like body and mind and like what those things mean and how they interact and like what it means to be yourself, which is like a thing that is always on my mind. As you can tell, I brought it up like a million times. But it's like really cool. It's also very like accessible in the way where like there's not really a whole lot of like stuff you have to do besides like walking around, talking, and like finding things. Yeah, which is like the best way, I think, to like let those ideas breathe. Like mechanics are like really important, but like you kind of just like need to let your characters like sit around and like talk and like let like the player kind of engage with that too.
Yeah, that's like a really interesting way to game. That's like the something. What is that new game that's going to come out? It has like an educational mode. What is it called? Oh, it's a new Assassin's Creed.
What?
Yes. So it's like set in ancient Egypt.
Oh, that's kind of sick.
And so they have an educational tour mode where your character just walks around and you can go to different parts of
that's cool.
I guess Egypt, and just like you can observe and like interact with like tour guides.
This is like the first time
that are like professors.
I gotta be honest with you, that was literally the last thing I expected you to say. Assassin's Creed.
I'm like, yeah, that's the same. That demographic definitely wants an educational mode for sure.
That's pretty cool. I honestly would have never thought, but that actually I might be interested, because like Assassin's Creed, I'm just like, what?
Like,
I want to play that now.
Right? I mean, they're putting in so much effort trying to rebuild this ancient city, so it might as well make use of it.
Yeah, if it's Egypt, I'm down.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm into that because like I'm just not into like sci-fi shooters at all. There's just like no, I get it. Like violence is going to happen in like the, human condition, blah, blah, blah. But like, it's just so boring and tired. Like in, all the ways that we've discussed like tropes and stuff like that. It's like shooting a bunch of aliens and robots and stuff. I'm like, I could not be less interested. Like, just tell me what you have to say in like a more interesting and less violent way.
Yeah, I'm also like just really bad at shooters. My character just spins around and like
I'm so bad at it because I can't
focus. I'm like, oh, I just can't do this.
I like move the joystick around too fast or something. Just hard.
But also they're usually bad.
Oh yeah. I don't know if you guys ever heard of a little tiny game called Halo, but it's the most boring.
You're like, that's my favorite sci-fi ever.
Oh, jeez. Can you imagine?
I'm so sad.
It has to be someone's.
I know, but can you imagine I get on here and I'm like, well, I just really love Halo.
Well, I would expect you to totally have like, you'd have to fight for it. Otherwise, I'd be like, I don't believe you. It's bullshit.
Like, okay, well, I guess we have to fight now.
Yeah, you have to convince me that it's like good.
It's
Impossible.
Not. It's not.
Oh man. Well, okay, so it's about an hour. Should we sign out?
Sure.
Iasmin, do you want to drop some info about your new book and where everyone can find you?
Yes.
Okay. I'll do that. It's just funny. I like to really like talk with friends and like do all this stuff, but then it's like, oh, I'm not really good at talking about myself. But okay.
No, just do it.
So Mish Adra is coming out tomorrow. But by the time you hear this, who knows when that's going to be. So October 3rd, you can get it at your local bookstore or whatever, or wherever else fine comics are sold. And then you can find me on Twitter, I guess, at deltahead_. And my website is just my name, YasminOmarAta.com. All my stuff's on there. I have an itch.io also, itch.io/deltahead. It's like where all my comics and games are. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's about it. That's like my little
Nice.
spiel.
Your little spiel. Okay, Leslie, where can everyone find you?
So you can find me at Leslie Hong on Twitter and Dairy Free on Instagram, and lesliehong.com is where my blog is, and that's it.
Nice. And my website is sloanesloan.com, and that is also my Twitter handle.
Yeah, and you can find Salt and Honey Pod at Salt and Honey Pod on Twitter, and you can email us at saltandhoneypod@gmail.com, and our show notes are on our Tumblr, which is also Salt and Honey Pod. That's where we link all our like stuff that we talk about and everyone's info.
Yeah. Have we gotten any email yet? Have you checked it?
We have.
Wait, we have?
Well, we got like an email that was like, okay, let me look at
Sorry,
it
don't
really
worry,
quick.
laughing.
It's like a complaint.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's not a complaint. It's just a suggestion. But it was a
Thanks,
suggestion
Katie.
from Katie Hooper. So thank you, Katie, for emailing us. She said, if favorites don't make sense for how often you do this show, maybe a section on what you're reading or watching makes more sense, and briefly talking about what you're currently enjoying and not enjoying without pressure.
Huh. Okay, like a little beginning section. That's cool.
Do you have anything that you're reading or watching, Yasmin?
Well, let's see. I did Localhost, like I brought up, was the one that I was playing the most recently. Right now, my roommate Pablo and I are playing Danganronpa, which I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, but yeah, it's like a...
Yes.
I'm sorry. It's on PS4. Yeah,
Is
it's
it on
like
PS4?
Danganronpa, just like short thing. It's just like Battle Royale plus Phoenix, right? Like kids trapped in a classroom have to kill each other. And this one actually might have some sci-fi stuff actually as a sidebar. So I've been doing that. I've been reading a book called The Body Keeps the Score, which is about like processing trauma, how trauma works, and like how we have all these myths about trauma and like the human mind and body. And it's really wonderfully written. And I would highly suggest it, especially if anyone that you know has like trauma, or if you experience trauma. It like is very enlightening and validating. I've only gotten like 10% through. I'm already like, this is amazing. Mm-hmm. And I'm also reading Crash Override, which is Zoe Quinn's book about how she survived Gamergate, which also has been really inspiring because like she has been through like the worst of the worst, like publicly and privately, but she still speaks with like hope about like game spaces. And to be honest, like, you know, I have like kind of bristled at like some things that have happened, like both in comics and game spaces recently, but like the way that she talks about like things with like an overarching like sense of hope and like we can improve this is like very inspirational. So those are all things I've been enjoying lately.
Nice. What about you, Leslie?
What have I been watching? I've just been watching Terrace House. I just finished Aloha State. I didn't like it. Overall not recommended. But
Not watch.
But I've also been watching like the first Terrace House, like the original run, which was like 8 seasons. So I'm like getting into that right now. It's really weird. But
and it's just like a dating show, right? I mean, I'm sure everyone who listens to this will probably already know what that is, but
it's kind of like the Real World.
Okay.
Like, so it's like a bunch. It's like three. I mean, it's like a little bit different from the Real World, but that's kind of like the most accurate like parallel, I feel, in terms of shows. So it's kind of like, you know, three. It's very like heteronormative, but like three guys and three girls go into a house and they live together, and they like live their normal lives. Like they still have their jobs, or like they still go to school or whatever, but they usually like meet together and like talk and like get to know each other. Sometimes they date, sometimes they don't, but
interesting.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting, but like Aloha Stay is just not as good because I don't know, like they don't want to like by the end of it no one wanted to hang out. So it's just like it was just nothing. So but like you can watch like Girls and Boys in the City on Netflix, I think, and that one's pretty good, and it kind of like takes you places that you don't expect for like how limited the premise is, but it's pretty good. I'm trying to think of what else I've watched. I watched like the newest season of BoJack. That was good. About depression and horses.
Can I?
Yes.
Is it okay if I jump in real quick for a second? I was gonna bring up Neo Yokio.
Did we talk about that already?
Because you started talking, and I was like, Neo Yokio.
I watched it in like.
Because I know you've seen it, right?
Who are you talking to?
I only watched the first
review
episode so far.
I watched all of it in like a day, so I feel like I like consumed it too fast, and now I'm like, oh no, there's no more.
Oh,
Why'd you do that?
Yeah, I love it. It's just so like
it's so New York.
It's so stupid. It's just so dumb, but like in the best way. And like some bad press is coming out for it. I guess people are like, "Oh, it could have been good, but it failed." And I'm like, "How are you taking this show seriously at all?" I don't understand.
History will like remember the winning side, and it's the side that liked it.
Yeah, you don't want to be on the wrong side of history.
Yeah. Like in all honesty, I expected it to be I don't know if I expected it to be bad. I was just kind of like, what? Like when I first heard about it, I was like, I don't know. But I actually really enjoyed it. Kind of reminded me of Utena.
Yeah.
In a way, but like in New York.
Yeah, it's like just sad like, rich people depression, like in vague future.
Yeah, like, and like the real elements, like absurdist elements as well. And I feel like you can't take it too seriously, but also like it's, I don't know, I feel like that's fine. I don't really know what people's problems are.
No, I feel the same way. I'm like, just stop, like just enjoy it. Like it's okay for something to be like chill and kind of stupid, but like funny and cute.
Yeah, I was like, we all at least saw some pictures from like Avatar: The Last Airbender, and like, there's no way Neo Yokio looks worse than that. And like, if anything, like Neo Yokio is actually like a accurate depiction of like a certain culture. Anyway, yeah, that's all I've been. I don't think I feel like everything I've watched and read, I've mentioned already. It was like AA and Neo Yokio and BoJack Horseman. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much it. That's what I've been up to. I'm like in the middle of my deadline, so I'm not really trying to consume too much new stuff, even though maybe I should. I don't know.
Yeah, about like there hasn't been really any good movies out lately, but I bought a bunch of comics at SPX.
Oh, so yeah.
I have like a little stash that I'll talk about over the next 5 years.
Yeah, it's hard to get that con like haul, and then you go home and you're like, there's so much here.
Yeah, I just add it to the pile. The one that's like easiest to read, it was like the New York Review books. Mm-hmm. Push Wagner's book called Soft City. Have you seen that one?
No, I don't think I have.
It's by this Norwegian like pop artist, and it's super crazy. It's just like splash pages of like cityscapes and like office-scapes. And it's just like and I think it's just like 1 point perspective, but like the detail in it is like simple but like super complex, and I'm not describing it good, but it's super cool looking.
It is cool. I really need to get back into reading more comics, even though I have a ton that I need to get back into. I think I have I bought like a bunch. I don't remember which ones I have already yet.
You need to get like an iPad so you can read webcomics too.
Oh, it could be like a singular use iPad.
Yeah.
so I can read Beast for a King.
We can get like digital comics too.
That's true. I mean, I usually read digital comics on my computer.
Oh, okay. But that's not as comfy.
I know, it isn't comfy at all, actually.
Okay, well, you need to get an iPad. You have to get with the times. Even my grandma has an iPad.
Fine. Brutal. Think about it. I guess if I can't be friends with you, I have to get one.
Yeah.
It's okay. I just got one.
I'm sorry, but it's true, okay?
So
All right.
Oh. Okay, cool.
All right, well, happy Inktober.
Oh no. Yeah, good luck. Don't
everybody.
Forget to drink water.
Yeah. And it's not okay to use non-ink products. I'm sorry. It's just not okay.
I mean, that's literally not what it is about.
Inktober.
What's like the non like analog version of Inktober? What would that be
like
called?
wait, you mean like digital?
December.
Digitober.
Ooh, that leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Digvember. December. All right. Well, I won't keep you anymore. This will be a good app, I think. Very good app.
Yay! I'm glad. It was really fun talking. You guys are really cute.
Yeah. Yes, very fun.
I'm glad you had fun. It was good talking to you about all our pressing questions.
Yes.
We love you.
Love you.